Thank you, Lloyd and Mr. Chairman and members of the Infrastructure Authority. Thank you. I'm going to diverge just a tiny bit and talk about some of the macro levels the U.S. faces, talk about how this affects Wyoming, and a couple of 3 or 4 solutions. I'm not going to spend any time talking about electricity. We've got that well covered. The state is certainly self-sufficient in electricity, and so is the United States. We have arguments about the primary fuel source. That's fine. We're going to have those for the foreseeable future. So let's go forward, and let's see if I've got the right button. So let's talk about some of the past policies with energy independence, and what goes on in Washington, what goes on around the world, what goes on in the Middle East, eventually comes home and affects us all at the pump. And so, what were the past policies? Very few people realize that we had a mandatory crude oil import quota. Does anybody remember this policy? 1958, President Eisenhower put this into effect, limiting imports to 12% of US domestic production. What very few people realize is this is what actually spawned the creation of OPEC, as the exporting countries banded together to find a way to reduce supply to maintain a higher price of crude oil overseas. But it didn't really work because the domestic price of US crude was double the price of crude oil in the world market. This policy stayed in effect until President Eisenhower, as vice president, removed the quota in 1974. We had crude oil price controls, pre-72, post-72, 73, 70. That's also a result of his vice president. And then we had the implementation of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is really a non-issue altogether. So why do we worry about this? Well, 95% of the crude reserves are held by sovereign nations, not the U.S. I'm not sure what Wyoming's share of this is, but it's not quite enough to impact U.S. prices. World oil prices have risen during the greatest recession of the past 80 years. And RAND estimates the probability of a significant negative supply shock of at least 8% each year. Not just 1 year, but each year over the next decade. This has nothing to do with Syria. Syria has absolutely zero to do with crude oil markets. So let's take a look and see what happens if we have a 10 million barrel a day cut in supply. This could happen from blocking the Straits of Hormuz. This could happen from an attack against Saudi Arabia. It could happen from multiple attacks throughout that region. We could have a challenge with Russia as well. So we've done this in an old-fashioned way. We've done the elasticity of demand in a short-run period, which my economics class at the University of Houston is dealing with in about an hour. And so we've determined that if you have a 10 million barrel a day output decline, you're going to get a shock price of up to $330 a barrel. And if we use an analysis that Bill Nordhaus did, who was on Carter's Council of Economic Advisors, if we use his numbers, we could have an even greater shock. This should put you into an ouch framework. This type of trebling, doubling, this is going to show up as $12 to $15 a gallon gasoline at the pump. And everybody will be running for Sherry's natural gas fueled vehicles, but we don't have the infrastructure in place to use them. If we looked at this and said, hey, we're going to have a one-time shock and it's going to hit us up to $400 and then you wear it down over 6 months, we're going to wind up with a cost to the economy in the billions and billions of dollars. This is going to be a huge impact on an economy that does 12 to 13 trillion a year. An extra $500 billion of unexpected impact in the United States is going to slam us into a significant recession. So how do we avoid this? we go back to Eisenhower, back to the future, and say, let's start a 10-year program of gradually reducing our dependence upon imports from folks outside the U.S. and Canada. We love Canada, they love us, but for fate on one of the Great Lakes, maybe we would be merged at this point. And so we look at Canadian crude as ours, and we say if we start reducing our dependence upon oil from Latin America and the Middle East, we'll get to a point in 10 years where we're going to be free of the economic challenge of a world oil price impact, and we're going to be self-sufficient. And so by limiting imports, we expect this would cost, just in a simple analysis, $40 billion in consumer surplus. We're going to cost consumers in the United States $40 billion over 10 years. And over the same period, we would see domestic producers gain $227 billion, with a net gain to the U.S. economy of $187 billion. Now, you know, these are all precise numbers, but the goal is to be, you know, as everybody knows, Keynes talked about being precisely wrong and you know, generally right. And this is the direction we're going. The goal would be to increase reliance upon domestic production. And as you increase these prices of domestic crude, you bring into the money alternative resources. You bring into the money electric vehicles. You bring into the money the ability to spend money on compressed natural gas vehicles and LNG vehicles. Now, we look at shale oil technology development, and Morgan Stanley in January said that the average marginal cost for shale oil is $51 a barrel. This is not counting acquisitions costs, lease costs. And for those of us in my prior company, we helped lead off the Niobrara shale development. You know, we got in at $20 an acre because we had the best geologist in the business. Conoco just spent $6,500 an acre. God bless them, I wish they'd bought it from us. We point out to them they could have bought it from us at $500 an acre. This doesn't make them any happier. But the highest cost Saudi crude right now is $25 a barrel. And so, why is shale oil economic? Well, really, since 2001, we've had a tremendous decline in the purchasing power of the US dollar. 25 to 30%. Crude oil is denominated in US dollars around the world. It is traded in US dollars. So if we take a look at the current price and say it's $100 a barrel, 30 of that is due to the fact that the dollar has diminished in value. So that gets us down to $70 a barrel plus or minus. That makes some of these shale oil plays very marginally profitable. We're now facing a situation across Asia where the prospect of the end of the Federal Reserve's quantitative easing has increased the value of the dollar with respect to Asian currencies. The Indian rupee is down 20%. In India, the cost of crude oil is up at least 20%. This is going to lead to diminished demand across the globe. If the Saudis don't pull back production rapidly in response, we're going to see a drop in the price of crude oil around the world. At some level, this will be reflected back into the Marcellus, reflected back into the Niobrara, back across U.S. oil shale plays in the Eagle Ford. And we may have a shakeout with some domestic production because of a diminished price for crude oil. So what are economic substitutes? Well, let's look back and say if we start pulling away from the world oil market, what can we substitute crude oil with? And of course, we need to have it refined to be priced at the pump competitively. We want it delivered seamlessly to the consumer, and that's certainly one of the challenges that Encana has. we cannot be subsidized by the federal government. We have those issues already. And we need a development of numerous commercial plants coming up by 2020. And so one of these is coal to liquids. I know we have Sasol in the audience. They've been doing coal to liquids for a long time. We have an estimated economic threshold at $86 a barrel, and approximately, I think that's $225 per BTU at the mine mouth. We know that CO2 sequestration costs are about $2.94 a barrel. These are data from the Department of Energy. You know, there's one plant in the USA today, in fact, and the only thing it's doing is creating syngas. I think this is it's the former US Synfuels Corporation. And there are 4 plants in the design phase, 20 proposed coal to liquids plants. That would be certainly one of the outlets for Wyoming to consider as we get into a situation of diminished reliance upon coal due to legislation in other states and across the nation. Wyoming, I think, supplies 40% of the nation's coal today, and more than 8 states rely upon Wyoming for 90% of their coal consumption, including, oddly enough, Texas. Gas to liquids is something that will work. We have production plants around the world. In Qatar, the big plant that Sasol has built with Shell and KBR. Exxon's built one there. It's roughly 10 MCF per barrel of product produced, and so with LNG, it's approximately a 7 to 8% shrinkage, if you will, in the gas that goes into the production of LNG. With gas to liquids, it's approximately a 40% reduction, and so we go from BTU equivalents of 6 BTU per barrel of crude, or excuse me, 6,000 BTU per barrel of crude to 10 MCF per barrel. Based on the NYMEX forward curve as of a few weeks ago, the price of gas could be as much as $5 an MCF, and the price of ultra-low sulfur diesel could be as low as $2.75 a gallon out into the next 15 years. And so those of us who've dabbled in natural gas and liquids trading can sit there and say, okay, we can go out and secure a supply of natural gas for as much as $5 an MCF. We can sell forward our product for as little as $2.75 a gallon. And if we do that, then we're going to wind up with a gross profit per barrel of approximately $65.50, or about $24 million a year for a 1,000 barrel per day plant. Why is this of importance to me? I teach energy economics, but I run a company in Houston. We have a 49 square mile play in Matagorda County. We have over 700 BCF identified on this acreage in conventional plays, not counting the shale, which is here. We have logs that indicate lots of pay. We've talked to the landowner from whom we've got the mineral lease. Do you want to be paid on a royalty on $3 gas? Or do you want to be paid on a royalty of $115 a barrel of product refined? And the family's pretty clear about this. Well, geez, if you can do that, that's a 2.5 times hit for us on the royalty. That's good. That, you know, the equivalent of getting paid on a $10 an MCF price versus $3, this is easy math for us to handle. And that's something I think that's available here in this state. And these are the plays our G&G team have identified. It's really kind of neat. And so we've been investigating this for the last 6 to 8 months. And we're now looking at, here in Wyoming, natural gas production is now back at 2007 levels. This is due to a lack of takeaway capacity. We were out here in 2007, we got a whole penny an MCF before REX went in. And as soon as REX came in, we got up to about $4.50, $5 an MCF. We sold those wells right away, by the way. And this lack of takeaway capacity is not unique to Wyoming. We've just had a new chairman appointed to FERC. I don't know that he's going to be very friendly to the construction of interstate pipelines. FERC has never been friendly to interstate pipelines. This analysis from Yale shows that the economic value added for pipeline companies across the United States very rarely gets above zero. The economic return on capital for building a new interstate pipeline is so limited by the rates regulated by FERC, it is extraordinarily difficult to make any money. Extraordinarily difficult to actually go out, argue for a new pipeline, put it in place, and make a return for your shareholders. Kinder Morgan's doing very well with this because they're buying up old iron at discounted prices. But to go out and build new pipelines is a real challenge. And so you've got a real problem in this state. You're not going to be able to get the molecules out as they are. They're going to go out of the state as electrons, or they're going to go out of state as liquids. So we look at the GTL technology. Sasol is clearly the industry leader with decades of experience. They're building a plant in Alberta. It's looking to go at 104,000 barrels a day. An estimated Canadian of $5 billion cost. That may not be right. I know Scott's here, he can correct me on this, but that's what I saw from the press releases. We know there's a Lake Charles plant that's underway. This is the one that was announced by Governor Jindal in Louisiana. 96,000 barrels a day in 2 phases with a $16 billion estimated cost. We look at the smaller modular plants. People have been touting these for decades. And the question is, can someone reduce this process down to something of a 10-acre footprint where it can be commercial and be replicated? You know, we've certainly seen this with power plants. It's real easy to put half a dozen frame 6s together, run the natural gas in, and you have a footprint of a power plant that would be 20 times larger if it were a coal plant. There are different companies touting this: Shift Resources out of Canada, Grey Rock out of California, Compact GTL, that's where the former CEO of BP has gone. Ventec Engineers in Texas and Oxford Catalyst, Velocis, they have the technology they license to these the construction companies. You know, I'm not sure how real some of these companies are. One doesn't return calls, doesn't return emails. I think their goal is just mining money from venture capitalists. But the bottom two are actually building a plant in Pennsylvania in the Marcellus. It's supposed to come online at some point in the next year. This will be very interesting for all of us. The costs are estimated at about $100,000 per flowing barrel of capacity. And so for a 1,000 barrel a day plant, we're looking at a $100 million expenditure if those engineering estimates hold up. Operating cost of about $15 per barrel. So if you have a $65 barrel gross profit, now we're looking at a net operating profit before tax of $50 a barrel. That's plenty of leeway. You know, and then the one currently under construction by Ventec with Velocis. And you know, we've done this on an academic footprint with our paper Synfuels to replace crude oil. And that's supposed to be an ironic title, by the way. And then these are other resources where you can check our data and our work. The state has a remarkable resource. Net exporter of oil, net exporter of gas, net exporter of electricity, and the future is at best uncertain. And so there are 4 or 5 different ways you can go. Gas to liquids may be one of the approaches you want to take.